Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gorilla Whale, a Godzilla watch-along podcast. I am your kaiju consultant, Kevin Carpenter.
And I think I just watched a good Godzilla movie, Kayla Knudsen.
There's been good Godzilla movies before, and there shall be good Godzilla movies after. But by God,
but it's been a minute.
It's been a minute. It's been a minute.
Not to say that I haven't liked previous Godzilla movies, but there's a difference between, I said I liked it, not it was a good movie.
That's fair. Yes, today we will be returning to form, folks, with The Return of Godzilla, also known as Godzilla, also known as Godzilla 1984, also known as Godzilla 1985, because it released a year later in America. Yes. So real quick before we get into all of that stuff, the reason for the titling was because these guys pulled a Halloween 2018 and decided to release their new Godzilla kinda reboot.
It's a requel.
What?
A requel.
A requel, yes.
A reboot sequel.
There we go. Reboot sequel. The original Godzilla 1954, that happened. And then they decided to make a movie that would be a sequel to that movie and ignore all the other movies that happened. So Godzilla vs. Megalon didn't happen. The Zillions, no longer there. Terror of Mechagodzilla, I don't know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So they decided to release a sequel to Godzilla, and they named the sequel Godzilla, which I don't understand when people do that. They did it with God of War. They did it with Halloween. They did it with Sonic. I don't know. Anyway. So, because people, of course, have to differentiate it between the original Godzilla, which was named Godzilla, we do that ever-honored practice of stapling the year it came out next to it. So, it came out as Godzilla, and then it was known as Godzilla 1984, but then it came out a year later in America, so they called it Godzilla 1985 over here, and now the Toho official international title is The Return of Godzilla. So, that's what we're going to be using for today's episode.
Sounds good to me.
Yep. So, here's the deal. It's been a little bit since Terror of Mechagodzilla came out. They retired the franchise for a little bit after that movie for various reasons, mostly because they kept putting these things out like once a year, and it was really starting to show in the budget. So, 1975, Terror of Mechagodzilla comes out. And then 1984, 9 years later, 9 years and 9 months to be exact, The Return of Godzilla comes out.
Okay, so it hasn't even been 10 years since the last Godzilla movie.
No. Yeah, it's been just a little under 10 years since the last Godzilla movie, and we're bringing it back.
We've gotten Spider-Man at greater frequency.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think the gap between, like, Amazing Spider-Man 2 and the Tom Holland Spider-Man was even shorter.
The gap between Spider-Man 3 and The Amazing Spider-Man wasn't even that long.
I mean, the gap between Batman is, like, we have two concurrent Batmans going on right now. We've reached the Batman singularity. And I guess we've also reached that with Godzilla, too. Anyway.
Okay, I will say this, just as a small aside. The thing about Spider-Man reboot constantly versus Batman reboot is that, to me, I love Spider-Man, so do not get it twisted. Spider-Man's a great character. I think Batman is a little bit more elastic of a character, because when we look at the tone of Batman properties through the last almost 100 years, they vary wildly. Not to say that Spider-Man isn't goofy, but even when Spider-Man's really dark, Spider-Man's still kind of goofy. And a lot of the main Spider-Man stories and movies and TV shows are pretty similar in their tone. Whereas Adam West Batman and The Dark Knight Returns, those are both Batman, but they're wildly different Batman. And you have Batman with the Robins, Batman with the Justice League, Batman by himself. Like, different adaptations of Batman happening at the same time that are different in their tones and what they're using Batman to do. Like, that's going to happen more often than Spider-Man, simply because Spider-Man's elasticity is not the same. However, we do have two Spider-Man concurrently, because we have MCU Spider-Man, and then we have the Spider-Verse.
I suppose that is true, yes.
Which is the animated Spider-Man that has all of the multiverse Spider-Man to talk about how there's a Spider-Man in every... Like, they're doing concurrent Spider-Man, but it's also it's different.
Yeah.
Like, the tones and stuff are not necessarily as different as Batman properties often are.
Well, speaking of
Or
Batman,
can be.
Return of Godzilla has a lot in common with the Tim Burton Batman, because that was the movie that was like, okay, we're going to bring back Batman to his more serious roots after the Adam West Batman has kind of been hanging in the cultural consciousness for years. And the Return of Godzilla had sort of the same mission statement, was like, okay, we have goofy Showa Godzilla that everyone's aware of. Now let's bring Godzilla back to his, like, he's a monster rampaging offspring of nuclear anxiety fears kind of stuff.
Crucially, what happened in between Adam West Batman and Tim Burton was Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns.
True.
Which was very interesting. It's a little, I feel like it's become slightly controversial. And we don't, this isn't a Batman podcast, and I'm not prepped to get into any of that. But that was, I think the way that Frank Miller described it was, quote unquote, giving Batman his balls back. So yeah.
Incredible.
Like, that was a comic book event that was really, really popular that shifted the tone. And kind of in the same way that, like, before Riverdale, the CW show happened, Archie Comics did a comic book storyline that took place in a zombie apocalypse that was a really dark and grittier tone from the typical Archie comic. So they stress tested it in the comics before they did it in the movies.
To be fair, Archie Comics have always done weird crossover stuff. They had a crossover with Punisher. They had a crossover with Predator. Like, they had an animated series called Archie's Weird Mysteries where they just did sci-fi schlock, but with the Archie gang. At one point, they did Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, but with Veronica. Like, Archie has always been this elastic, you can put him in any sort of weird situation property, even though, like, at its core, it is also like this Americana, oh, look at this ginger good old boy, have two girlfriends at once, ain't it keen, kind of thing.
You know what I'm hearing? I'm hearing after Godzilla, maybe it's a Riverdale.
No. Putting a kibosh on that right now.
7 seasons, Kevin!
God. So, Terror of Mechagodzilla came out in 1975. Return of Godzilla came out in 1984. 9 years, 9 months. So, what's happened in between then and, well, then?
A lot. Oof.
Yeah. So, Vietnam War ends in 1975. Japan releases the VHS in 1976. They're also on the path to becoming an even greater economic and technological powerhouse on the world stage. Blue Oyster Cult releases their hit song Godzilla in 1977.
Hey.
Even though they haven't been making any more Godzilla movies, he's still very popular. And let's see, in March 1979, the 3 Mile Island nuclear facility in Pennsylvania suffers a partial meltdown, reigniting atomic fears. And also in 1979, governments held up by the United States in Iran and Nicaragua collapse. The Soviet-Afghan War also breaks out, which means the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union gets even colder, or it heats up, however you want to phrase it. Let's see here.
Things get worse.
Things get worse.
The doomsday clock gets closer to striking 13.
Yeah, we're getting into the Watchmen era here. Ronald Reagan becomes president. We have the AIDS crisis. Other stuff happens. And then we get to 1984. Also, real quick for the timeline, Emperor Showa does not die until 1989. So the movie that begins the Godzilla Heisei era is still technically released in the greater Japanese Showa era. I think we touched on this in the previous episode.
Yes, because I was confused. I do understand why they would just say this is basically the start of the Showa or the Heisei era, because it is a requel.
Yeah.
It's a reset, and everything that comes after it is in the Heisei era. So, you know, I get it.
It's understandable.
I'll allow it.
So we're
Don't worry, Godzilla fandom. Kayla, newbie to the scene, will allow this.
So as we were talking earlier about getting back to Godzilla's serious roots, producer Tomoyuki Tanaka, who produced the previous Godzilla movies, he really wanted to bring back a serious Godzilla. And a quote I found in Japan's favorite Monstar: Godzilla is a world-famous character, on a par in terms of notoriety with Superman and Star Wars. Star Wars also came out in 1977. That's not part of the quote, I just wanted to put the little timeline in there.
Yeah, because when he's talking about this, we've had the Christopher Reeves Superman movies in the 70s, and Return of the Jedi was 83. So the whole Star Wars trilogy, original trilogy, has just come out.
Yeah.
And we've had at least two big blockbuster Superman movies.
Mm-hmm. So, it's a lot of big franchises while Godzilla's been resting, and Tomoyuki Tanaka is like, no, Godzilla's still on par with these guys. So going back into the quote, unfortunately, we had to close down the Godzilla film series once because ideas had become so weak and the costs were too much. Despite this, Godzilla is loved by several generations, so I think it is a good idea to bring him back for a new film to celebrate Toho's 50th anniversary. Since we had a problem in making Godzilla just for younger ages, we now think that Godzilla must be for a general audience, both older and younger people. By introducing more new superweapons and using the fear of nuclear power as a basic theme, we can broaden the audience. End quote.
It's a 4-quadrant film.
So there were a few failed attempts to bring back Godzilla. At one point, they were going to do a 3D movie. That didn't work out. There was a big, American Hollywood endeavor, but they couldn't find the funding. They really wanted to get, top talent special effects people. They couldn't get it out. So that plan went to the wayside. There was, one or two other Godzilla ideas. And then Tomoyuki Tanaka finally got the movie he wanted greenlit. And so, on December 15th, 1984, Godzilla returns to the big screen.
I do have to say, just before we get into the summary here, and I'm sure that Return of Godzilla is probably one of the more watched Godzilla movies. For people following along, I'm not sure how much of our audience has watched every single movie as we are watching it, but I do imagine that a larger chunk of the audience has seen this one. So you're already with me when I say Tanaka says that they have to stop doing Godzilla movies because the ideas became so weak. They are doing a true blue requel that really does just kind of hit a lot of the same beats of the original one.
Yep.
Which, listen, I think that, and I guess, we'll talk about this more after the summary, but I do feel it's a valid approach. And we'll go into that more in the discussion. But I do think it's interesting that he's like, all these new ideas sucked. Back to basics. Repeat the original.
Bring back the nuclear stuff. Godzilla's a monster again. We got to get a fresh start on Godzilla. Make him dark. Don't make him do a Shie dance. Don't have him do a atomic breath propelled flying maneuver. No, he's a monster. Give him back his teeth, literally.
But more importantly, no aliens, missing fishing boats, reporters, nuclear anxieties, government censorship. These are all major tenets. So yeah, go ahead, Kevin. Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. We open on a Japanese fishing boat, which is not the Lucky Dragon number 5. This is the Yahata Maru number 5. Completely different boat.
Mm-hmm.
And this boat is caught in some bad weather. As crew members look toward a nearby island exploding with light, we hear a familiar roar, and then we cut to the next morning. Reporter Goro Maki, named after the protagonist from Son of Godzilla, comes to investigate the missing boat. Inside, he finds the entire crew dead, except for one survivor named Okumura. He is also attacked by a giant sea louse the size of a bulldog. And for those who don't know, sea louses are big parasites. Imagine just a big isopod kind of thing. My nightmare. But he is saved by Okumura stabbing the vermin at the very last moment. Reporter Maki and survivor Okumura return to Tokyo soon after. Okumura is kept in a government hospital, and Maki is forbidden from publishing the story. A doctor named Makoto Hayashida explains that the monster that destroyed the boat was actually Godzilla, and if news got out that Godzilla had somehow returned after being defeated in 1954, there would be mass panic. So, once again, real quick note, only acknowledges the first Godzilla movie, none of the other ones happened. So this is the cue to the audience, hey, Godzilla vs. Megalon didn't happen. Don't expect Jet Jaguar to appear.
Yeah, he's not coming to save our asses.
Yeah. Reporter Maki decides to be a little shit and meets with Okumura's sister Naoko. He tells her that her brother is still alive and being kept in a government hospital. This is all so he can get a photo of the two siblings reuniting for his story because he's a journalist. Gotta get that story. Meanwhile, Godzilla does pretty much the worst thing he could possibly do during the height of the Cold War. He attacks a Soviet nuclear submarine. The Russians think the Americans did it. The Americans say they didn't do it. And the Japanese prime minister is caught in the middle. Oy! Their only option is to publicly admit that Godzilla is back and he probably attacked the submarine.
So the Stanislav Petrov halted a retaliatory strike by the Soviet Union against a perceived American launch of a nuclear missile in 1983. So the timeline of like when they were writing and making this movie, that just happened, but we didn't know about that right away, right? Like we didn't know about Stanislav Petrov until later, right? Wasn't that like, hold on, let me see.
It's just so funny to me thinking about this from like the American and the Soviet Union perspective. Like imagine like you're thinking Cold War, height of tensions, you're really just thinking about other countries trying to get in on your borders, nuclear missile threats. And then suddenly Japan is like, yeah, so remember that giant monster that was in the news like 30 years ago? Yeah, he's back. We're sorry. We're going to figure this out.
Okay, to confirm, the incident did not become public. The Stanislav Petrov incident did not become publicly known until 1998. So Stanislav Petrov had already saved the world from nuclear annihilation in secret because of a mixed signal in this incident, the Americans would have blamed the Soviets for a strike that didn't happen and then do their own strike. That the scenario in this movie already happened. Except, it was Godzilla did actually attack a submarine,
Yeah.
Woof.
Yep. So we're a lot of Cold War tensions in this film, which is very interesting.
And they didn't even know.
So the JSDF mobilized to find Godzilla, and they don't have to search long before Godzilla attacks a nuclear power plant and eats all of its energy. Godzilla is then distracted by a flock of birds and leaves to follow them. Reporter Maki and Dr. Hayashida are confused, but they soon theorize Godzilla follows Earth's magnetic field to navigate like a bird when it migrates. Perhaps, if they can create a magnetic transmitter, they can lure Godzilla into a volcano and blow him up there. I don't know. We don't have oxygen destroyers. We gotta do something.
Also, apparently, the oxygen destroyer only worked for about 30 years.
Yeah, right? We saw him turn into bones, and then the bones disintegrated, but hey, Godzilla's back. We're not even doing the lazy excuse they did in Godzilla Raids Again, where it's like, yeah, no, this is just another Godzilla that we're also going to call Godzilla. No, Godzilla's back. Don't worry about it. Well, actually, do worry about it. Godzilla's back.
He regenerated.
Yeah. In a heated political meeting, the Japanese prime minister refuses to allow America and the Soviet Union to launch nukes at Godzilla from their satellites in orbit. The Japanese government have their own secret weapon to use against Godzilla, a flying ship known as Super X, which was originally designed to shoot down nuclear missiles. By the way, I do want to be known that all the Americans in this movie speak English, but that halted English of someone who has lived in Japan.
It's an interesting accent.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, so this is what it's like when people from other countries who speak other languages watch American actors use their accents. Just a point of order. I don't think they're launching they're not launching nukes from satellites.
They are. Both the Soviet Union and the Americans have satellites in orbit that can launch nuclear missiles.
I thought the satellites were just detecting stuff.
No.
We don't have satellites. Okay, so just as a note to people, that is full science fiction.
Okay.
We don't have satellites that are nuclear capable. The nukes are all on Earth.
Is there anything else you want to mark as science fiction? The Super X flying ship, Godzilla?
No, that's just that.
Okay, cool. That was the thing that got stuck in your teeth.
I'm really into nuclear stuff.
Fair enough. Godzilla appears once more, this time in Tokyo. People evacuate, and tanks and jets scramble. The JSDF launch everything they have at Godzilla, and You know how this song and dance goes. Godzilla is unharmed and he completely wrecks shop. Bad news. Turns out the Soviets had a secret nuclear weapon control ship in the Tokyo harbor, and Godzilla happened to topple it during his attack, which turns on the ship's nuclear missile countdown. Soviet Colonel Kashirin bravely attempts to stop the missile launch, but dies before he can press the button. I'm going to come back to the scene later once I'm done with the summary, but just remind me of that later, Kayla. So Godzilla is rampaging. He's destroying buildings. He's tearing apart trains. Gotta get that Godzilla tears apart a train shot.
Oh, yeah. He loves it. He loves a train.
It's so... This shot is also...
And I love it.
I love it, too. The shot is also so interesting because you have all the people in the train, and then he picks up the train. So you have the shot of all these people in the train car looking at the end of the destroyed train, and they have the close-up view of Godzilla's face, and it's super terrifying. And then we cut back to a wide shot of Godzilla, and he just kind of casually throws the train to the side. And it's like...
Incredible.
It's like, hang on, didn't we just like go super close up to establish that there's a bunch of terrified lives in this train car, and now we're going to cut back to him just kind of...
and he just tossed them.
Yeah, he just tosses it away.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what he does. He kills wantonly. And with no regard for the fact that he wants to eat. He's just doing it.
Godzilla has a body count again.
Of course he does.
Reporter Goro, Dr. Hayashida, and the only female character, Naoko, are racing to complete the magnetic transmitter. There is also a vagrant who is stealing expensive liquor and food in the now evacuated Tokyo, and at one point he yells at Godzilla as if he's an obnoxious tourist that's, like, ruining the town. I mean, he is, but, like...
I love this guy.
Yeah.
I love this guy. This guy, Tokyo is being evacuated, and he's like, you know, I'm homeless. Fuck it. And he goes into a restaurant, takes a buffet, pops some bottles. Absolutely. Absolutely 100%. Like, because here's the thing. Are you going to die terrified in an alley, starving? Or are you going to eat? And also, what are the chances? Like, you know, he literally is like, there's so much of Tokyo for this guy to rampage. Like, what are the chances that he's going to get my building? You know, like, I love it.
Yeah. Something I found out about myself while watching this movie. So, folks, I just want to let you know, we're recording this in January 2025. So, hopefully, we're at the tail end of the Los Angeles wildfires. But those have kind of just been raging for...
Yeah, it has been less than 10 days.
Yeah.
We're fine. Kevin and Kayla are fine, luckily. We're very lucky to not be in areas that are directly impacted by evacuations. But it has been a nerve-wracking several days of checking watch duty and checking in with friends. I do know some people who have lost their homes and people who have evacuated and stuff.
Yeah.
So it is to watch this right on the end of that was something.
Well, and that's the thing is I realized something about myself, and it's that if Godzilla was attacking, there would be a calculation of like what distance is Godzilla before I evacuated. And with these wildfires, I realized that distance is not as far as I think it would be. Like if Godzilla was attacking Long Beach, I'd be like checking the radar and being like, okay, but is he heading north? Like, there's that whole hill.
Yeah, or is he going down to San Diego?
Yeah.
You're, like, checking the wind.
Checking the wind, but, like, none of them are really heading toward me. And I'm realizing as I watch Return of Godzilla, like, I'd be the exact same way with Godzilla.
Well, yeah. Well, and more to the point, like, specifically this character is homeless. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have stuff to evacuate. He doesn't have a home to flee. How is he, like, what's his transportation system for getting evacuated? Like, presumably they're using a lot of public transportation to help people, but I do think it's very deliberate that they had a homeless guy take food and enjoy food and, you know, talk about like have this sort of nihilism to the entire situation. I think that's a lot more significant and poignant than if it was just some guy that was like ignoring evacuation orders because he didn't think it was that big of a deal, you know? Like, this is very clearly like, he's hungry, he's starving. he doesn't think he's gonna die, but also maybe in the back of his head, it's kind of like, well, at least I'm gonna, like, I want to have a good meal before I die.
Yeah.
You know, this is an opportunity for him.
And it's not like he's going into a department store and grabbing a VHS player or like a big TV or something like that. He's literally like,
Yeah.
ooh, I want to try the really expensive liquors. Like, I'm going to break into this really nice restaurant and like just chow down. This is going to be great.
Yeah.
One other thing to get into is that, so this vagrant character appears in like 2 scenes, absolutely steals the movie. The thing is that he is played by Tetsuya Takeda, and he was apparently sort of a special guest appearance. He was well known for being in a long-running, highly rated television series called Kenpachi Sensei. So it was very much like Japanese audiences at the time would have been like, oh, hey, he's in this movie? But also he was, busy with a TV show and a big name actor at that point, so they only got him for those few scenes.
Oh, that's fun. That's fun. It was a stunt cast.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a stunt cast. It was just like, hey, we got that guy real quick. He plays a vagrant who calls Godzilla
Love
a
that.
bitch.
Love that.
So what was I?
I feel like in an American version of this, it would be like maybe like Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah, it'd be like if they got like Charlie Day or Danny DeVito or someone else from the Always Sunny crew to just
Charlie
appear for a
Day,
minute.
who was in Pacific Rim while
Oh, shit.
Always Sunny was still going.
True. So, the JSDF launched the Super X flying ship against Godzilla. Their secret weapon is special cadmium missiles that they launch right into Godzilla's mouth. Godzilla gets the worst tummy ache in the world and falls unconscious to the cheers of crowds of onlookers. There is this kind of interesting shot where Godzilla's like slumped against a building and there's like a crowd of people like cheering like, oh, hey, Godzilla's down, hooray.
Now you gotta move him.
Yeah. But it's too early to celebrate. Not just because you now have to move Godzilla, but also because that nuclear missile countdown finishes, and the Soviet satellite launches its payload toward Tokyo. Heroically, the Americans fire their own nuclear missile at the Soviet missile and blow it up in orbit. Hooray! The day is saved! Oh no! The nuclear radiation woke Godzilla back up!
Yeah, they do. Like, it explodes in space. So I'm sure that scientists have run tests regarding that, but I don't think that we've exploded missiles in space in actual life to test it. It looks really cool.
Yeah. In the movie, it causes this rad red electricity cloud storm kind of thing. So already all the people that were cheering for Godzilla going down, they're just screwed. They have super cancer. I
don't know that they would, though, because they're being protected partially by our atmosphere. So I'm not sure how. I just said that I was into nuclear stuff, but I have not deeply explored the scenarios of nuclear missiles being blown up in space above Earth's atmosphere, but I don't think they're going to get that much radiation not nearly as much radiation poisoning as they would be if it exploded in atmosphere closer to them.
I would just think that if there's enough nuclear radiation to wake up a Godzilla, like that's just not a good space to be.
Okay, but is it like that it's actually that he's sucking up all of this power or is it like a shark smells blood in the water? You know what I mean?
I think he's sucking up the power because he took a bunch of cadmium missiles to the throat, and the cadmium was supposed to like absorb the nuclear radiation in him or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So everybody's getting cancer.
Everyone's getting cancer. I also think that if you're just in the vicinity of Godzilla, you're probably going to get cancer too. Especially,
he's probably shedding massive amounts of radiation.
This dude breaks into nuclear power plants and eats the energy directly from the reactor. Like we're adding that to the Godzilla mythos. We didn't have that before. Remember, he would supercharge himself with like lightning bolts and stuff like that.
At what point is Tokyo so irradiated by Godzilla's presence that it's evacuated permanently or indefinitely? Anyway,
Godzilla goes for round 2 against the Super X ship. But the Super X ship is run out of cadmium missiles. They only brought 4. And so it's shooting at Godzilla. Godzilla smacks it down. And then he topples an entire skyscraper on top of the Super X ship. So it's just gone.
Oh, yeah. By the way, the Americans shooting out one nuclear missile with another. Well, you wouldn't use a nuclear missile to take out another nuclear missile. You would just use a regular missile to take out a nuclear missile. But also, like, that is, of course, one of our defenses against nukes. It has a 40% or less chance of actually succeeding.
Oh.
I mean, it's hitting a bullet with a bullet.
Great fun fact that I'm really glad to know about now, Kayla.
Just so you know.
Yeah.
But it works because it's the movies.
Exactly.
USA.
You... Dr. Hayashida and the finished magnetic transmitter are airlifted out of the city, but Maki and Naoko are left behind. Meeting up with the bravest vagrant in the world, the trio run away from Godzilla. The vagrant is unfortunately killed, but not before he calls Godzilla a bastard one more time. This dude dies cursing out Godzilla and calling him a tourist.
I mean, he went out like a Chad, but I was so sad that he did die. I was like, oh no, they punished the homeless looter.
He died doing what he loved.
Cursing out Godzilla.
Yeah. Before Godzilla can eat our heroes and fulfill Kayla's wildest dreams, the JSDF
so close.
Turn on the magnetic transmitter. Godzilla
we almost had the perfect Godzilla movie.
Almost, this close. Godzilla is fascinated by the signal, and he soon moves toward the volcano at Mount Mihara. Godzilla then falls into the volcano like he slips inside, and then the Japanese government blows up the volcano with a bunch of explosive charges. We end on sad orchestra music as Godzilla is buried, hopefully to never return.
They Terminated 2'd him before Terminator 2 was out.
Wow, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Godzilla holds up a single thumbs up and goes, "I'll be back." in 6 years. Actually, no, 5 years.
Crucially, Terminator killed himself to prevent the code from, because he was like, the whole point was to destroy all the Terminators and etc. So he committed heroic suicide. This was Godzilla being murdered in self-defense.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was Terminator. It was lava, essentially. Molten steel, lava, whatever. It's fucking hot.
It is kind of lame how he goes out. Like, it is amazing how we're still struggling to reach the heights of a scientist blows himself up to kill Godzilla and secure that his research can never be used as a weapon of mass destruction. And instead, for the return of Godzilla is, well, Godzilla is really fascinated by birds. Like, we figured out the birds are dinosaurs thing before we figured that out in real life. And I double checked the timeline on that, by the way. The science wasn't conclusive by the time this movie came out.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, Godzilla moves around like a bird. So let's just make a weird noise at him using this transmitter, lure him into a volcano, and then blow it to Kingdom Come. And we'll just kind of hope that works. A dozen missiles to the face didn't work. But maybe if we blow up a volcano while he's in it.
This is also predicated on the idea that Godzilla is stupid enough to step into a volcano because of a transmission.
Yeah.
Like, no animal is gonna run into a fire, into the fiery pit of a volcano. Will it, like, you have to chuck that motherfucker bodily.
Godzilla doesn't have that much personality in this movie. And I know I'm saying this about the giant rampaging monster.
This is just survival instinct.
Yeah. But like 1954 Godzilla, he was a force of nature. Tokyo is on fire by the time he's indiscriminately destroying everything. And then you have, like other Godzillas, you have the goofy Showa Godzilla, and then you'll have the American Godzilla, where he's like a scared animal, and then you have the MonsterVerse Godzilla where he's like this like big brute, stuff like that. Like Godzilla's, while they're all giant monsters, they all have their own personalities. This one just kind of feels bumbling.
Yeah, like he feels he's stupid. He's stupid in a way that like any living creature would not be.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know we've all seen our pets do some stupid ass shit, but we've also like, I've never seen my dog like walk into a fire, because the tennis ball is in there.
Yeah.
Like, it burns. The dog can feel it. Somebody's gonna comment a video of their dog, of of their dog doing some really stupid, dangerous shit but fire is hot, you know?
Mm-hmm. It is the climax of this movie is sort of the equivalent of using a laser pointer to put Godzilla into a hole.
Yeah. It is a little weak. Like I do feel the problem, I guess, is how do you get rid of Godzilla once you've wrapped up the plot lines that Godzilla creates, like the themes? Because, I mean, so much of this obviously was like Cold War anxiety and playing out, as the beginning one was all about like fears of the nuclear age and this power that we don't understand. We are 30 years in. We're deep in the Cold War. We know more than we ever wanted to, and it scares us. And Japan is caught between these two nuclear powers. Like, the rest of the world is caught between these two nuclear powers, teetering on the edge of total destruction and annihilation. And there's nothing that anybody else could do about it. Like, we see Cold War films made by America from the perspective of Americans, where we are valiant bastions against crazy Russians, you know, and I'm sure that Russians have it the other way around, where they are valiant heroes against those deranged, power-hungry Americans. Like, it's the same thing, but to see the perspective at the height of the Cold War, because again, like the original Godzilla, of course, is from the Japanese perspective following, well, the fallout of the first two nuclear bombs. It is really interesting to see the portrayal of the Soviet Union and America from that perspective. I thought it was really fun that the American, like, diplomat or ambassador general, whoever it was, literally, like, the whole conversation was, you know, they're arguing with Japan, like, let us use nukes on Godzilla, you know. Yeah, of course, Tokyo will be irradiated. Japanese citizens will die. But they're like, but we have to nuke you to keep us from dying. And the American is agreeing with the Soviet about all of this. And literally the American says, this is no time to be discussing principles. And then, you know, the Japanese government is like, no, it's the right time when principles are at stake. Like, it's so, like, poignant and fascinating and really strips everything bare and lays it bald of how dangerous and trigger happy America and the Soviet Union kind of were. You know, I mean, obviously, like, it didn't happen, you know, and Stanislav Petrov had just a few years earlier, unbeknownst to all of them, stopped the breakout of a nuclear war by being level-headed. But it is just like, whew, oh boy. It's really scary. It really brings everything forward the way that the original film did. I think it was probably, like, one of the strongest points and strongest scenes in the entire film.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's really interesting to see how atomic anxiety evolved from Godzilla 1954 versus Godzilla 1984. Because in 30 years, 1954, it was like the existence of the atomic bomb itself was the anxiety. And then 1984, it's the greater international ramifications. It's the height of the Cold War. It's when is a nuke to be used. It's the anxiety of nuclear reactor meltdowns. It's the anxiety of accidental missile launches. It's the anxiety of just international miscommunication leading to wanton destruction. And it's really interesting to see that from the original Godzilla to the Return of Godzilla.
Yeah, like, the original Godzilla, you get, like, obviously their whole thing is Godzilla was created by nuclear testing, but it is sort of presented so much about, like, it's presented in a way that Godzilla kind of happens out of ignorance and arrogance. Like, Godzilla is an accident and more of, as we've said, a force of nature. This is very much, nuclear annihilation is not a force of nature. It is a force of mankind. It is, like, full tilt. The responsibility is being laid very squarely and very firmly on humanity. And humanity no longer has the excuse of ignorance. Like, we know what we're doing. Because, you know, at the time, a lot of the U.S. was sort of like, well, we didn't know how bad it was going to be. And there's some debate, and we've declassified some documents, and maybe they knew a little bit more than they were letting on about how destructive everything could be, slash, part of the point was to see exactly how destructive it was going to be. But yeah, we've learned a lot about how destructive it's going to be, and we've learned a lot about how any sort of nuclear annihilation, it will happen via human error and human fear.
Oh, yeah. It is also interesting to see Godzilla in a more modern Tokyo with the taller buildings.
Yeah.
We touched upon this in the previous episode when we talked about the Godzilla Power Hour, but they had to double the height of Godzilla in this movie, so he didn't look so small against all the skyscrapers.
Yeah. He just doesn't keep getting bigger. We keep getting bigger.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was very fun to see Godzilla in a more modern... It was just, this is, to me... I mean, this is the first Godzilla movie in the 80s, and I think, the 70s is, one of the golden ages of Hollywood, but it's really, for me, I grew up on a lot of movies that were from the 80s, and I think that a lot of modern filmmaking looks back upon the 80s, or a lot of our sensibilities were established in the 80s. So even though this was a Japanese film and not an American film, there was a lot of that there. And it's a lot of it felt so modern, which was fun to just be we're here now. We are here in more of the modern age of cinema. We're still dealing with a lot of the same anxieties, but those anxieties have also evolved. And it's fun to see them make use of their technology and their effects as those evolve, because it's still, of course, a lot of practical effects. And
yeah,
I think that the whole Godzilla volcano thing was weak, no doubt about it. But otherwise, I do think this was a really well constructed film.
I will say that this movie,
they gave them a budget.
They did have a budget, and they've definitely evolved in their special effects. I will say that this movie kind of reminded me of the original Star Trek movie, the first one, because both movies are so excited to finally have a budget, and so they spend a lot of time on slow panning cinematic shots to show off their special effects. And nowadays we watch these early 80s movies and we're like, okay, all right, we get it. But back then it was whoa. So in the original, the first Star Trek movie, they have all of it's 3 minutes of just panning around the Enterprise while it's in a space dock, just to show it's hey, this isn't just a ship dangling in front of a black box by a wire. We actually have a budget now. And in Godzilla, it's showing off how big Godzilla is and moving around the city. It's not just cardboard boxes anymore. Looks,
guys. Yeah, it's, what it is, it kind of, because it's we are a little bit desensitized to how impressive those effects are. You're right, we're just get it moving, whereas a modern audience is eating up the eye candy, because to them it is eye candy. And to me, I think probably one of the best modern equivalents I can think of is watching Dune, because Dune is such a slow paced film.
So which Dune?
Either one of them. Dune Part 1 or Dune Part 2.
No, I mean, okay, so you're talking about the Timothy Chalamet Dunes and not the original.
Yeah, the Denis Villeneuve Dunes. Yeah, Denis Dunes. Because that's slow-paced and stuff, but, it just looks so pretty. I don't mind, you know what I mean? I'm totally here to just watch all of it, because it is eye candy to me to see these, huge landscape shots and the architecture of everything, and that's kind of the fun thing I think about science fiction and fantasy, and why a lot of people that don't like it, they don't like it. They'll say oh, it's slow or it's boring or whatever, and some of it kind of is and some of it isn't, and some of it's our sensibilities changing and pacing changing. There's a common joke that Lord of the Rings as it is would never be published today. They'd make him cut 100 pages at least, because it doesn't move fast enough. But it's about the vibes. It's about the atmosphere. It's about being in this different world. So if you enjoy exploring different worlds and getting into those details and minutiae and feeling transported and looking at all of the eye candy, yeah, like that's where it's going to be, is in sci-fi and fantasy and stuff, and they are going to take a while to slow down because and show off the world, because so much of that is the point of the
Hmm.
genre, is we are somewhere else. And obviously this takes place in our world, but it is still a different, it's Godzilla.
Yeah, it's got that like near future sci-fi technology. Like we don't
Yeah.
have the Super X flying ship with its really simplified design. I did not like its just round, not many exterior details design going on here. I thought it was kind of boring, but
Well,
you know,
Kevin, it's the Super X. It was designed by Tesla, obviously.
I have been trying so hard not to say SpaceX this entire time.
Yeah, it was very simple.
Yeah.
I think they spent a lot more money on Godzilla. They had some really cool like close-up shots of Godzilla
Oh yeah.
too. Like the eye, I really liked when his eye took up the whole screen. I was like, "Ooh, that's fun."
His eyes can move. He has teeth. They made a giant foot for those scenes where he stomps on people. It's really good.
Yeah.
So, there is something else I need to mention about this movie.
Oh.
Do you remember Godzilla 1954 when they brought it to America and they cut up a bunch of stuff and they downplayed some stuff and they really just went to town on the edit of the movie?
Okay, here's the thing, Kevin.
Guess what else
When
returned, Kayla?
It's funny because I did accidentally rent the American version, and then I realized, like, as soon as it started playing, I was like, oh, well, like, I went to go put on, there's no captions, and I went to go put on the captions, and then I realized there's no Japanese audio, and then I had to go get a different version. But, so I didn't watch it, but are you about to tell me that had I played it, it would have been a fucking rehash of what they did to the original?
Well, it depends. So this movie is weird because historically it was very hard to get a copy. There's a Japanese version, there was the American re-edit, and then I think that there was an English dub later on that kept the original editing of the Japanese film. But also it was very hard to gain access to a lot of this stuff. Only very recently have they really, like in the past 10 years, have they released like a DVD that had the original Japanese audio and stuff like that available for Western audiences. But when this movie came out, so the American version, Godzilla 1985, they did a bunch of cutting to it, and I looked over a lot of the changes, and a lot of them were just like weird, like put this scene in this order instead of that order, downplay this, and we'll add some stock footage here, like just a lot of weird cuts that I think were more of like, here's how the studio thinks it could be in a slightly better order or something like that.
Good.
It was good.
Like, that wasn't, like, there was no weird, felt, like I said, I didn't feel like I was watching a quote-unquote foreign film, because, people tend to get, really weird about foreign films, and they think that all foreign films are, weird and done strange and are, foreign. And I'm like, that's so xenophobic. People are people, stories are stories everywhere. And also, non-traditional Western 3-act structure or whatever is totally valid. But also, this is a 3-act structure. This is a blockbuster movie. Marvel could have made this movie. It's not different. This isn't a rag on Marvel. This is just Marvel makes a very specific, common type of movie. This is that movie.
Here's the deal. The most prominent re-edit that they did to this movie. You remember that scene I talked about earlier where the Soviet nuclear missile countdown starts and then the Soviet colonel heroically tries to stop the countdown, but then he dies before he can press the button?
Uh-huh.
Well, in Reagan's America, they decided to shoot new footage. So that way it looked like the Soviet colonel rushed in and purposefully pressed the button to launch the missile.
Which is the exact opposite of what actually happened with Stanislav Petrov, which we don't know about because it's not 1998 yet. People are people everywhere. I really need everybody to understand this. We are human beings. We are people everywhere. Everywhere there are people, people are people.
That sounds like communist talk there, Kayla. We can't let the Soviets be shown heroically at all. No, they need to be purposefully behind the problem.
We are literally, also, by the way, as we are recording this, TikTok may or may not be banned today it seems like maybe it's not going to be banned yet. But anyway, a lot of Americans are going to Red Note, a Chinese-owned app, and are making, friends with Chinese people and are talking to Chinese people for the first time, like, ever, and are like, wait, some of the things that the government is telling me about Chinese people, this doesn't match. These people are just like us. They also have memes.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms. The other thing about the American re-edit is that our old friend Raymond Burr is brought back as reporter Steve Martin.
Okay.
So here's the deal. By the way. So first off, in the movie, they just call him Martin or Mr. Martin because at that point, Steve Martin was a prolific comedian. So
yeah,
they never call him Steve Martin.
Now they can't call him Steve Martin.
Yeah. But apparently Raymond Burr really loved working on the original Godzilla and really loved the original themes of like the serious nuclear anxiety Godzilla. Mm-hmm. And so when he was brought on, he found out that originally they were going to re-edit it so it became more of a comedy. And Raymond Burr did a lot of pushback against that. He was like,
okay.
no.
Everybody say thank you, Raymond Burr.
Everyone says thank you, Raymond Burr.
Wow. Of course America would try to make it a comedy.
One thing he was not able to push back on, though. So Dr. Pepper was...
the drink of choice here at Digital Kaiju Studios. Not sponsored, but we do love Dr. Pepper here at Digital Kaiju Studios.
So Dr. Pepper was already using Godzilla in commercials before this movie came out. And so when they heard that Return of Godzilla was coming out and then there was going to be an American re-edit, they got in contact with the studio and they were like, hey, we'll help with the marketing campaign. We'll throw in a bunch of money for the re-edit and reshooting and all that. Only for the non-negotiable appearance of Dr. Pepper drinks in the film. That was one of their things. So if you watch the American re-edit, like the original Godzilla in 1985, you'll see a bunch of like military colonels and all that having very serious discussions about launching nukes at Godzilla, and they're holding Dr. Pepper cans with the logo facing the camera.
You're telling me that the little drawing that Ashlee drew of me so that we can have little cartoons up on our TikTok and our reels when we do sound bites to advertise the episodes, where it's a shirt calling out my love of Dr. Pepper, and it's the Dr. Pepper logo, but written to say not a doctor, because I'm not a doctor, that you're telling me this was prophetic?
Yes.
To Dr. Pepper's involvement in the Godzilla.
Dr. Pepper and Godzilla are linked.
We've reached the singularity. I am convinced now more than ever that we live in a simulation. Thank you.
I'm telling you right now, and I've told you this before, and I'll tell you it again. Godzilla is life.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, one last thing about the American re-release. When the movie released in American theaters, there was also a 1969 cartoon short attached to the beginning of the movie called Bambi vs. Godzilla.
Oh my god.
Hey guys, real quick, secret episode here, all right? I'm going to give you the summary to Bambi vs. Godzilla, another mainstay Godzilla franchise entry. So Bambi vs. Godzilla, here's the summary. Bambi is eating in a meadow, and then Godzilla's foot stomps out Bambi. The end.
What?
That's it.
Oh my god.
That's the whole short. There's Bambi, Godzilla stomps on Bambi, credits roll.
That's so dark. I mean, I know we just watched a train full of people get chucked over Godzilla's shoulder, but what the fuck?
Yeah. You're an American audience. Godzilla's back.
Disney allowed that?
Well, this was a student film, and this was...
that makes sense.
Yeah, this was a student film that then got really popular because it's a really funny joke. And then it was officially attached to Return of Godzilla. And I think that was just before Disney got, like, the GDP of small nations money to sue people out of oblivion.
Oh, yeah, I guess they weren't really... This is the 70s or 80s. Like, they're not... The Renaissance hasn't happened. They've had some bombs. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, in 1969, it was also when this short was made. It also was a different story for them financially. Mm-hmm. Wow. You said student film, though. I'm like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so some things before we wrap this up.
Hell yeah.
I loved, at this point, you guys might be like, Kayla, why didn't you say anything about the giant louse? And this is me now saying something about the giant sea louse. I fucking loved it. Also, I love Godzilla having an impact on the ecology. I was over the moon that there was giant radioactive space louse that are attached to Godzilla, or sea louse that are attached to Godzilla. Also, it reminded me of the facehugger scene. This movie does take place after, or this movie was made after Alien, but before Alien 2. Aliens. So full on, I was like, facehuggers. Loved that we had like reporters and professors back at it again. I thought it was very interesting. Our reporter character was fighting for the truth, was helping, a sister reunite with her brother, but was also using them to get this. Like, he was a very complex character of both representing truth, but also representing kind of the predatory side that media and journalism sometimes has, and that like negative reputation that they have with the public. I thought it was interesting. I really liked that it was just one character holding both of these, holding this dichotomy about journalism and the public's perception of media and things like that, instead of being represented by two different reporters, as we have seen in past Godzilla films, or multiple reporters, I should say. So I thought that was really cool. I thought that was interesting. We love bringing in complexity and having complicated characters with multifaceted characters. Oh, they mentioned Los Angeles class submarines. Hey, LA mentioned.
Hey, LA mentioned.
By the way, just in case anybody, this is a fun fact about why we named submarines after. We used to name submarines originally. Submarines were named after animals. So it'd be like sharks or the sea wolf, stuff like that, things that sounded intimidating. And then when they came out with the Los Angeles class of submarines, these are nuclear power submarines, they started naming them after cities. Now, this is an old class of submarine. It's not like the current new submarines. So some of them are still around and a lot of them have been decommissioned, but they were named after cities because fish don't vote, which is a quote from Hyman G. Rickover, who is the father of the nuclear navy, and thus he is the only one that has a nuclear navy, or a Los Angeles class submarine named after him, and then every other Los Angeles class submarine is named after a city.
Fascinating.
I thought that was fish don't vote. We're gonna name we'll name our nuclear subs after large American cities. So there's the Los Angeles, there's the Phoenix, there's Boston, all sorts of ones. And then I also thought it was interesting, Godzilla attacks the Soviet sub, and then, oh no, they're going to go to war. I do love that a well-timed press release was what saved us from nuclear war. You gotta love some good PR. And the Godzilla photo was just, when it came up on the screen, it was just, Godzilla still exists, was like the headline. Which I thought was very funny.
Well, they couldn't go, fuck, Godzilla's back.
Yeah. I love that when they proposed the volcano idea. I mean, this is what my subtitles said, so maybe it was a little bit different. But the response was just, it's incredible. Like, was the volcano plan really incredible? I don't know. But okay.
I think it was incredible that no one else had a better idea.
Right. Like, yeah, they really, they wrote this great script. It was like it almost was like, well, this is what we're going to do. Let's work on the rest of the script, and then we'll figure this out later. And then they never figured it out later.
Also, technically, the volcano plan was Plan C.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Plan A was the firing line at Tokyo Harbor. Plan B was Super X. And then Plan C was like, crap. He destroyed all of our missiles.
When you put it in that context, I suppose I can understand why this was Plan C. It's fine then, actually, when I really think about it. Another thing, I already talked mostly about the Russians and Americans begging Japan to let them use nukes and how philosophical that whole thing got. One of the other quotes that I really liked at the end was from Japan to America and Soviet Union. What right do you have to say that we must follow you? Banger. Love that. Call them out. Oh, yep. Godzilla loves his little trains. Looting a buffet is excellent. Oh yeah, I do think it was really interesting that ultimately with the whole like the nuclear missile situation, that Russia was technically at fault for accidentally launching. It was an accident, but it was a Soviet missile that was launched.
In the American release, it was there. They did it on purpose.
In the Japanese release, yeah, I know. In the Japanese release, it was Soviet. It was the Soviet Union that launched a missile accidentally because of a Godzilla attack, and it's America that saves the day. I do think it's really fascinating that is what that is what Japan chose to do. I think it makes a lot of sense when we look at where Japan is on the world stage in the 80s. It is a capitalist nation. It's become a strong economic ally with America, or it's about to be. It has Russia on its fucking back porch, propping up China, and Japan and China have a long history. Mm-hmm. So it like makes sense to me that Japan would, while criticizing America, still make America out to be the hero. And I think it is so fascinating and telling that even in the American release, the Soviets had to be worse so that America could look better in comparison. And I'd have to watch actually the American re-release to see how the whole let us use nukes debate went down and how they looked there. But I do think it is, obviously it's all very telling.
And by the way, we're not doing the thing we did last time where we're watching the
We're not going to watch it.
No, we're going to the next movie for the next episode.
Yeah, we're just moving on.
Yeah.
I wasted my money renting the American release.
Incredible.
Yeah, that was about it.
Cool.
Of things that I wanted to cover.
Kayla, what would you rate The Return of Godzilla?
I would say, I'm going to say 3.5. I don't want to give it 4 because I do really feel like the volcano situation was kind of weak. If that was stronger, the whole getting rid of Godzilla ultimately, then I probably would give it 4. And maybe this is me being a little harsh, but I'm going to say 3.5.
Cool.
I think it really I think that need to have been tighter to get it 4 stars. But I thought it was really, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was a good movie overall.
So I'm going to be a little harsher, and I'm going to say 3 out of 5. I think this is a perfectly reasonable movie. I think this is a great return to form for Godzilla. I think going back to more serious roots, while still maintaining, this is a Godzilla movie. We're here to see him cause a bunch of destruction. I think that's really cool. I think the human characters just weren't there.
Yeah.
I think their motivations weren't really that strong. I think the fact that the strongest character was a vagrant that appears for 2 scenes is a bit telling. And I already mentioned
he's the most memorable character. Yeah.
Well, and he also had the strongest motivation, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody else really did feel kind of like archetypes or representations of ideals rather than more complex characters.
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned, the journalist kind of had a bit of duality with him, but yeah, there was a lot of. Everybody was pretty flat. I will say I was so distracted by the Cold War thematics that I was like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll give you that for sure.
I like the wider themes, though. I like how they're messing more with international stuff. I'm really liking the enhanced special effects of this movie. They're actually taking their time and giving it a budget and making sure the movie looks good and isn't too silly and hitting those 4 quadrants, as you said earlier. So yeah, I'll say 3 out of 5 movie. I am very excited to see the next movie, which is somehow even more 80s than this movie. Kayla, what are we watching next?
Well, it's 1989 now. Everybody knows 1989 is peak 80s. Next, we'll be watching Godzilla vs. Biollante, 1989. Be sure to watch the Japanese version, not the English dub. If you liked this podcast, be sure to subscribe, give us a rating, leave a comment, and share with a friend. Follow us on social media. We got the links in the show notes. We also have a Ko-fi. You can support us there and get access to cool bonus content like extra episodes and access to the private Discord, where you can talk with other geeks about Godzilla and all things Digital Kaiju. Check it out. Gorilla Whale is a production of Digital Kaiju Studios. It is hosted and produced by Kevin Carpenter and Kayla Knutson. Gorilla Whale has no official affiliation with Toho, Legendary, or any other companies associated with the Godzilla franchise. We thank you for watching along with us. Until next time, watch out for kaiju.
Watch out for kaiju.